You're listening to Inside Lebo, a podcast giving you an inside look at Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Hosted by Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans and Assistant Public Information Officer and Online Editor Stephanie Hackey.
Welcome back to Inside Lebo. I'm your host, Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans.
And I'm Assistant Public Information Officer and Online Editor Stephanie Hackey.
Joining us for today's special episode is Mount Lebanon's newest commissioner, who was recently appointed to the vacant 3rd Ward seat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ann Swager-Wilson, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, you were recently appointed. Tell us why you were interested in serving on the commission and why you threw your hat into the ring.
I have a long history of being in the public realm, more in the city of Pittsburgh probably than Mount Lebanon, but also sometime in Mount Lebanon. And I was asked by several people, it was suggested that I go ahead and apply for the position because I have enough experience where walking into the seat wasn't, a really hard study. I'm pretty familiar with how local government works, and I've been around for a long time. And so that's why I threw my hat into the ring.
Well, we're very glad that you did, and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm learning a lot, which is very fun. That's the best part about it.
That's
Meeting
awesome.
all sorts of people, learning all about the things that Mount Lebanon does. It's amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it? There's so much that goes into it.
Yes.
Absolutely, for sure.
Oh.
Well, tell us about your background a little bit. Where do you come from? Previous jobs, accomplishments, all of that good stuff.
Okay. Well, I started my career in Pittsburgh as a banker, believe it or not. And that's where I learned finance. I also hated banking because I hated saying no. And it seemed like the bank that I worked for, which will remain unnamed, only lent money to people who didn't need it, which never made sense to me and just was not good for my personality type.
Right.
So I went from there to staying home with my 2 oldest children for a few years, was pretty sure I was going to die of boredom, and so I decided to volunteer to work for a group that was called the Washington Road Task Force. Revitalization Task Force. It was an effort to try to revitalize Washington Road, and I volunteered and very quickly was pulled into doing almost a full-time job, helping set up the organization and all of those kind of things, and then ultimately was hired as the first executive director on a part-time basis. And so I'm the one, my group, not me, is who started the we used to call it the Booville Parade. Now it's called the Pumpkin Patch Parade, I guess.
Okay.
And we started Light Up Night in Mount Lebanon, which is now Light Lebo. Mm-hmm. And we started a very small farmer's market. Now all these things have grown and gotten much better than our initial tries, but yep, that was that group.
That's so cool. Mm-hmm. I love that.
So a lot of the big community events that we have now are thanks to you and your efforts.
Well, but I have to admit that my successes really come from all the people I work with. If it were just me, it never would have happened. I always had great people that I worked with, both volunteers and some paid staff here and there. So
that's awesome. Tell me about the transition from banking to that role, and how did you go about that?
Well, it was interesting because it was back when the National Trust for Historic Preservation was starting what was called the Main Street program. And their idea was that if you wanted your community, especially your business district, to thrive, you had to work from the uniqueness of what it was. So interestingly enough, it was about doing special events to bring people into town, attracting new businesses to your business district, and honoring the design of the buildings that were there. And I really have always liked buildings and the history of buildings, so this was a natural fit for me.
That's
and
awesome.
banking just gives you a good background in finance. I mean, it helps you understand how the money comes in and how the money goes out and how to explain it. And so that was how I went from one to the other.
I love that. So you made a huge impact on Mount Lebanon back in the day. Are you from Mount Lebanon? What's your background?
No. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, but my family is from the state of Maine.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
and they really, my dad used to say we were just visiting in Cincinnati. So,
I love it.
Uh-huh.
So how did you end up in Mount Lebanon?
I married into Mount Lebanon.
Okay. Okay. You're either born here or you marry in, pretty much,
That's
from what I
pretty
understand.
much it. But now I've been here I've been here 43 years, so I
wow.
feel like I'm from Mount Lebanon.
This has become your community for
Yes.
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Very
love
much
it.
so.
Okay. So you mentioned obviously your finance experience, and now that we're into the month of November, which is budget season in the municipality, how do you feel that kind of prepares you for working through the vastly comprehensive municipal budgeting process?
Well, that's a good word for it. It's really incredible the amount of detail that goes into coming up with a budget. And, like I said, budgeting and finance is all about the money coming in and the money going out. And there are never enough resources for everything everybody wants. So somehow you have to come up with a balance that you're, being careful with the money and spending it the way the citizens want it to be spent, recognizing that every citizen is different from every other citizen, so you can't
Absolutely.
please everybody 100% of the time. But we do a pretty good job of it, I think, with our budgeting. It's also such an open process. Any citizen can find out at any time how we spend our money and how we raise our money. It's right there for everybody to
Transparent.
see. Yeah, very transparent.
And shameless plug for a previous episode of Inside Lebo, people can check out our episode on the budget with Finance Director Andrew McCreary, which was released last week. So
Yes,
we're going to
absolutely.
take a short break, and we'll be back with more from Commissioner Ann Swager-Wilson. And we're back with more on Inside Lebo with this week's special guest, Commissioner Ann Swager-Wilson, who was recently appointed to fill the 3rd Ward seat that was vacated by Commissioner Leanne Foster. So, Commissioner Swager-Wilson, what are some of your hopes for Mount Lebanon in the years ahead?
I hope that we are able to preserve our history and to celebrate our history. I think one of the neatest things about Mount Lebanon is our history. The way the town developed, it's almost like a quilt. It's kind of a patchwork of things that happened here and then some that happened here. Very, very interesting. And it's very fun to be walking down the street and thinking about the houses that are there. Some are newer, some are older. Who used to live in them? How did they come to be? I love all those things.
So you have a background in working for a nonprofit in architecture as well?
I had the privilege of being the executive director of the American Institute of Architects in Pittsburgh for 27 years.
Oh, that's so cool. That's amazing.
It was a wonderful job. It was, architects are just such fascinating, interesting, smart people. The way they look at the world is different than everybody else. And it gave me a real appreciation for the difference design can make in everybody's lives. And, it can contribute to the public safety in a community, just numerous things. So,
How has that changed your view on Lebo? When you walk down the streets, you're talking about looking at the buildings and all of that.
and I always am trying to figure out what the insides look like. What's the floor plan of that house? How is it constructed? I mean, there's a house on Orchard, I think it is, that actually looks like it's made from cobblestones. I mean, it's so fascinating, the materials that people came up
So
with
cool.
and put into houses. Yeah, really.
That makes our houses very special around here.
They are special because there's such a big variety of them.
Right.
We even have those little Spanish houses here and there
Yes,
tucked in.
I love those.
I know.
I've always wondered the background of those. I think we've talked about that in our office at some point. Where did those come from? How did they get here? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I know from recent experience that we're doing public surveys as part of our comprehensive plan process, and a lot of the feedback we've heard through that is that we asked the question, what do you like most about Mount Lebanon? A lot of the response is sort of the character of our communities,
Right.
the character of our neighborhoods, and everything that goes into that too, right? The sidewalks, the walkability, the tree-lined streets,
The brick streets.
yes,
Brick
everything.
streets are
Yep.
fabulous.
Yep. Yes.
All those things are just so
It's beautiful.
interesting and different.
I love it.
In my neighborhood, I live in Lebanon Hills, and so part of it has brick streets, the older part, and you can see the line of demarcation where they started to put in fill and build houses in the 60s, because those are all blacktop.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Think about the names: main entrance, park entrance, connecting road. I always think that the builder came in and thought, okay, this is going to be the main entrance into my plan, and this is going to be the entrance that goes down to the little park at the end, because it wasn't developed yet. And this road, connecting road, is going to connect the two, and then the name's stuck. Yeah. I don't know that that's true, so
We were actually talking about the names recently, and where did they come from? How did they get there?
But that just makes sense to me. So now I tell everybody that that's what I think happens. And pretty soon that myth will probably turn into, the truth.
Yeah.
It's my favorite road name in Mount Lebanon, because like you just said, right? You can just imagine someone being like, here's a big road here, here's a big road here. What's this one do? It connects those two. All right, we'll call it connecting road.
Right. Right, and it stayed.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh my goodness.
Okay, so I think you also kind of covered this one, but what is your favorite thing about Mount Lebanon?
The history is my favorite thing, but probably the uniqueness of the town. It's just, it's such an interesting place to live. It's such an interesting way to see how it evolved as a town. I also like that it is, somebody coined this phrase at one point, that it was the most urban suburb. And I like that about it. I like that our houses are not on top of each other, but fairly close.
Right.
You know your neighbors. You have a sidewalk. A sidewalk to me is like a front door to your house. If you're sitting in your yard or gardening, when someone's walking by on the sidewalk, it's pretty hard not to say hello, because they're right there. Now, if they're out in the road, they're that much farther away. But right next to you, you have to say hello, and it makes it neighborly.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. And all of this together, you're on the Historic Preservation Board as well. Is that correct?
Well, but I have to step back from it because I'm a commissioner now.
Oh my goodness.
But that's what I was doing before.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yes, and they're working on a seminar for residents to have residents understand the history of their home and how to preserve the character of their house, as opposed to blowing it up and putting, some material that isn't a good material for that house on it. So
I love that.
And I remember a few years back, the Historic Board was involved with a design guide that we have on our website right now that kind of gives some high-level architecture overview to people who may not know a lot about architecture, but says, my house looks like this, and there's some great pictures in there that you can kind of flip through and be like, oh, I have this on my house. Okay, this is what it is and how to kind of maintain it.
Right.
It's really cool. Awesome. What are some of the challenges that you face in this new role?
There's so much to learn. There's such an incredible amount of things to learn. I've been going around on, I guess what I'll call a listening tour, interviewing department heads, staff leads, just to get a feel for what everybody does. And I tried to keep notes, but I can't even keep up. There's just so much going on at any given moment. So I think the biggest challenge is trying to learn it all, and then trying to represent the people that do all the work and, be able to explain what they do, why they do it, why decisions are made, what these policies are for. Those things are hard because, people oftentimes have a very strong opinion about the way something should be done, and yet it can't be done that way for a number of reasons. So trying to learn all of that is a daunting task.
You're doing all your research then, it sounds like, just by meeting people and talking to people and learning about the community.
Yes. And next I want to hear from residents. So I'm talking to Mount Lebanon staff now, but I'd like to hear from the residents. And if you want to reach me, you can either call me at 412-652-8289, or you can email me at awilson, so AWILSON, at mountlebanon.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on the show. And, we wish you the best of luck during your tenure as commissioner.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Sure. This episode of Inside Lebo was produced by Carrie Monyo with theme music by Drew Monyo.
And thanks also to Chris Leeper from the Mount Lebanon Public Information Office for the great artwork that we have for our show. tune in again next time for another episode of Inside Lebo.
Thanks for listening to Inside Lebo, produced by Mount Lebanon's Public Information Office. Learn more about all things Lebo at mountlebanon.org or by following our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.